interviewing is terrifying for people. Like, let's be real, right?
Right.
This is something you don't do every day, right? Because you don't often, apply for jobs. And I think for a lot of people don't like public speaking to begin with. This is like one of the most terrifying types of public speaking, right? So I'm thrilled
Right.
to have you
Right.
here. Just to share a little bit about Hansford. So Hansford Johnson, I met Hansford at Cigna, where we worked together for a few years. He is a unbelievable human who has throughout his entire career helped individuals with their careers. He actually worked in higher education at Yale, at Wake Forest. I might have missed another school. Multiple colleges, universities where he helped students and worked with employers. So that was like one side of the career he's had. And then he switched to the corporate world. He worked at Cigna with me. He now works at Travelers. Many of you probably recognize Travelers in the umbrella. They do property casualty insurance, home, auto, all those things you might be aware of. And Hansford just loves helping individuals with their careers, and he does an immense amount of that with Travelers now, with a huge focus on diversity, equity, inclusion on top of that, right? So just to kind of throw that in there too. And fun fact, he was a college athlete and played football. So not only is he extremely intelligent and loves helping people, he's also super athletic and a great football player. So he's got the whole thing going on. He's a great family person, loves his family. They mean more to him than anyone, and I'm thrilled to have him today. So Hansford, I will let you take it away, and I really appreciate you joining today.
Awesome, Nick. Thank you so much for having me. First, before I jump in, you can see me. You can see my screen, right?
We are good.
Okay, excellent. So first and foremost, before I jump in, I want to thank you, Nick. I know people has probably said it already, but I'm going to take the time because I have the mic, the virtual mic right now, and I want to do that. And thank you, for your vision, in putting this together, right? I mean, natural entrepreneur, obviously, utilizing your network to kind of put something like this together for people in a time when it's needed. So I believe in you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this platform to help. I honestly believe, I think the greatest gift that we can give to people is our talent, and to really make the world around us a better place. So Nick, thank you for allowing us, to be able to do, this, and thank you for helping us make the world around us a better place. So just to jump in, you're welcome anytime. So like Nick said, my name is Hansford Johnson. I work at Travelers. And I want to chat with you today or have a discussion. Although I know you can't necessarily speak to me, you can put some information in the chat. So I'll look forward to answering some of those questions in the back end. But I want to make this a dialogue again, although you can't necessarily speak to me, and talk about interview tips. Right? I think what you heard from a lot of people today is that there's really not one right way of doing things. So I want to preface it by saying what I'm not going to do in our discussion, today is focus on like technical interviewing, skills, or focusing on behavioral-based interviewing skills. I want to give, some basics, but also jump into, some foundational things and what I call like the end game, which is things that I think that you should remember. Again, these are tips. So I'm not going to go into the technical aspects of it all. Again, I'm open to helping. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn and have a more robust discussion on one of those particular topics, I'll do that. But again, given the swath of people we have who are listening, I want to make sure I cover awesome things, but want to level set before we kind of jump in, right? Just to kind of set the stage where we are, because again, you look a year ago and where we are right now is completely different. And it would be insane, asinine, for me to not recognize the environment that we're in and be able to deliver to you some tips, around interviewing, right? I want to talk about the basics, right? And this is important because what is common sense is not commonly done, right? I mean, I work in HR, I work in talent acquisition, I've worked in higher education, and there's a lot of things, obviously, I'm trained to do and to recognize, and man, I think everybody should know these things, but want to make sure, we cover some of the basics. There's some foundational things as well, too, that are just, again, foundational. They're hardcore, should be hardwired. We want to discuss that. And then really the end game, what does that look like? Before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview, 3 things I think that you should do. So let's go ahead and let's just jump in. Like I said, I want to level set, right? It would be, like I said, asinine for me to have a conversation with you around interviewing and not recognize, the environment in which we're in right now, right? It's COVID, it's disrupted us in so many ways. It's disrupted us, personally, right? Some people probably on this webinar probably got infected, or you know people who got infected or probably lost their life, loved ones. We can't see those loved ones. Society, the things that are happening in society, whether it's racial injustice, politics, all these different things that's happening, we're sheltered in place and we're having to look at all those things, right? And in all that, we still have to, whether, depending on where you are, interview for a job, get a job, or keep your job. We still have to do that, right? It's affected us professionally, right? It's ravished certain industries to the point where, obviously, the skyrocket numbers of individuals who have lost their jobs, right? And having to either do a career shift or think about kind of where they are and what they're doing right now. We're having to work from home, right? And we're gaining a different appreciation for teachers, right? As Nick mentioned, my family is most important to me. I have 4 kids, right? My background is in education, so I understood it. But man, we have a serious appreciation for teachers, now. And then also too, from just a level set, what COVID has done is hit us psychologically and disrupted us there as well too. It's caused us to really think about like what's most important. I travel quite a bit, for my job. I have not traveled in 9 months, and I wear suits literally 5 out of 5 days of the work week. Haven't worn one in 9 months, right? But it's causing me to really think about what's most important to me. And when we ever get back to what will be the new normal, I have to do some readjusting, right? And consider my, my career pathway. People are doing that because they're thinking about what they can do to help people. In all of that disruption that's going on, we still have to make sure that we're either getting a job, keeping our job, or advancing our skill set, right? So just want to level set there as well too. And with that, the last thing I'll say about this, I love this quote by Jack Welch, right? He says, if the rate of change on the outside, what's happening on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, and though he's talking about businesses, but I'm talking about you and I'm talking about me. If what's happening on the outside exceeds what's happening on the inside, right? The only question, that we should think about is when, because the end is inevitable. But the one thing I know about human beings is that we're resilient. So many of you who are on this webinar right now are here because you are resilient. So I want to encourage you, regardless of where you're at, looking for a job, got your job, looking for that next advancement, be resilient. If COVID-19 has taught us anything, that's what it's taught us. One more thing to kind of level set so we can get going. I want to make sure you understand, like, there's not one right way to kind of interview. You know that, right? You're going to hear a lot of different things, throughout the day, things woven in around interviewing, around resumes, around whatever it may be, right? And I don't know what it is about human beings. We always tend to think things are either an art, or a science. It can be both, right? There's not, a methodical process that you should follow as it relates to interviewing. So I'm not going to do that. And it's not just an art to just show up, the way you kind of want to, because again, you're being evaluated. It's a combination of both, so I want to make sure, that we look at that, right? You have to look at, interviewing. It's like a relationship. I like to think of it as like an 80-20 kind of principle, right? The 80% are those basic foundational things I'm going to get into that you should know, that you should do. The other 20% is like that awkward space, right? In a relationship where you're trying to figure that person out. Understand the company, right? If it's a behavioral, technical, whatever interview, there's a piece of each of those things in there. And understand it's an iterative process, right? And what that means is that you have to practice to perfection. Nobody just comes out and they're a perfect interviewer, right? Some people have a higher level of emotional intelligence, just a natural gift, around those particular things, or they work on it, but this is something that we can all work on, our interviewing skills, right? Because it's like emotional intelligence. You can build that muscle. So with that, we've kind of level set. Let's dive right in and let's jump right in. So I talked about some basics, right, that I think you should be aware of. And again, I told you it'd be asinine if I did not focus on the fact that we're living in an environment where literally everyone is doing interviewing virtually, right? If your company is still doing it in person, don't say it. I won't call, the federal government on them, but you shouldn't be. But the reality is literally every company is doing interviewing virtually. And, we were thinking about this the other day. There's thousands of newly hired individuals who probably haven't set foot in a physical building today. So we're living in some interesting times. So let's talk about some basics relative to the environment in which we live in right now. So again, these are things that I think you should know, but I would be remiss if I don't cover them, right? The first thing is around voice and volume, as this is moving really fast. Really important, right? Because you're not interviewing in person, and I'm the kind of person who likes to read the room. I pay attention to what's in the room, what's on the walls, looking at facial cues that kind of help me, to be able to interact and to engage and make a connection with this person. So there's a lot of distractions, right? We tend to think it's easier just because you're in a virtual environment, but there's several things that could happen that can literally distract the entire interview. And one of those things is voice and volume, right? Making sure you have adequate tool to be able to communicate. Don't do interviews on your phone. Don't do that. That's not good. Make sure you have, whether it's a lavalier or a puck like I'm using right now, something that can kind of amplify your voice, because there's nothing worse than having an interview and talking to somebody you really can't hear them. If I'm searching for your words the entire interview and all we got is the screen between you and I, you best believe this is going downhill. And typically an interviewer can tell within the first 3 minutes or so how this is going to go. So make sure your voice and the volume, are correct, right? The second thing that we'll talk about is position and posture and placement, right? Because we're in front of a screen, you want to make sure that, you're positioned somewhere where your whole head, is in the screen, not your eyeball, not, way back here or somewhere over here. That can be distracting. You want to limit as much distracting as there is, because if that is speaking louder than you're talking, they're not going to hear anything that you're saying. So make sure that you do that. It's critical and important. The environment and, your surrounding, very, very important. I think you heard it in several other sessions today. If you join, make sure you find a location and spot where you're not going to be disrupted, right? I know it's COVID, environment we live in. We're all on Zoom meetings and children are happening, dogs are happening, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of grace for that. But when you're interviewing, it's your time. It's you and that interviewer, that hiring manager, that final round, whatever it may be. And you want to make sure you eliminate as much distraction as you possibly can. That's really, really important. The next thing is around lighting, right? Make sure, you figure out, kind of where you are. It's nice to have it, kind of going back to the environment thing, all this action kind of happening behind you and your art and all these things so you kind of see your personality. That's great and all, but sometimes that can be very distracting. I'm going very plain today. I get it. It'll do what fits for you, but understand the lighting is important because we want to see your face, right? We don't want to see you glowing is, some kind of angelic being, or, it's so dark we can't even see your face. All those types of things are all disruptions. So make sure your lighting is right and make sure you do these things before you get on that interview. Really critical, important. The next thing is around the virtual background, right? There's a lot of people who have a lot of fun with this, and I get it. It's fun for Zoom meetings. It's fun for, just keeping things lively and whatnot. But for an interview, again, art, science, stay away from that. It can be very distracting. I know some people are really eclectic. They want to show kind of what's going on. Look, just stay away from that. That's just my advice on that. Leave the virtual backgrounds alone, right? Unless you've really tested it and you're in an environment where, look, honestly, there's not a space necessarily for you to go where it's, just clean space in the background, then put a virtual background on there. But make sure you pick something that accentuates, your face and accentuates, kind of what you got on, because if not, again, it's distracting and it's noise that you can't take away. Dual screens, again, some of you might have two screens that you kind of work with. Be mindful of that. I've seen people do interviews where they have their notes on one screen. They're interviewing with me over here and tend to forget that and make one their primary, secondary screen. They're looking at this screen the whole entire time. And I'm thinking like, man, could you give me some, like, your eyes? Again, in this environment we live in now, your nonverbal cues are even more important, right? Because I can't physically see you. So make sure if you're using dual screens to understand, if you're doing a presentation or you have your notes, understand which screen's the primary, which one's the secondary. That's critical, and that's very, very important, right? And do your due diligence. What I mean by that, we'll get to this, around, the organization, company, but make sure that whatever software, whether Zoom Link or Microsoft Meet, whatever it may be, they send to you, make sure you kind of test it before you get there. Because the worst thing you can do is to not show up, or you're having some serious technical difficulties. That time is allotted for you. That is your time. So make sure you do your due diligence, right? And
Hansford, can
Sure.
I ask you one question? It's not someone asked, but I want to just highlight this. Is it your recommendation when you are setting up an interview with a company, right? And they're like, hey, Hansford, we want to interview you for a job. Is it your recommendation to actually directly ask, will this
Absolutely.
be
You definitely want to ask
or
that,
no?
right? Because again, in this environment we live in, I would say primarily it will be on video, right? Because, even back what used to be phone screenings, are now virtual phone screenings, so you want to make sure you ask that question, right? You only don't know the things that you don't ask about. There's nothing wrong with you asking a particular question, even asking the platform in which they use to do interviews, right? Because you might not have that platform and you don't look at it until it's the day before or the 30 minutes before, and you're like sweating like bullets, and then the interview, you finally get it and you're all drenched and your energy's zapped and interview's done. So yes, ask that question. Good question, Nick. The last thing is, leave it in the meeting. What I mean by that, like in Zoom or whatever platform you're using, sometimes people don't end the meeting, don't leave the meeting. They just kind of, I guess they think that, the meeting's over with and they just kind of, they do whatever. And, sometimes, interviewers or hiring managers stay on and they're just kind of paying attention, like, what's going on here. So make sure you just leave and end the meeting, press that, double check it, just like if you're on a phone, and make sure you get out of there, right? So those are some basics. Now let's jump into some foundational tips. And I've broken this up into 3 things. I'm gonna try to be quick here because I wanna make sure we have time on the back end for you to ask questions, right? But I'm not gonna rush, but some foundational tips. And these are things I think you should do before. Again, goes without saying, you need to make sure you research the company, right? And the interviewers, like who's interviewing you. I know in the time we live in right now, people are putting in applications as if, that is your job. If you don't have a job, your job is to get a job. So you should be researching and applying to jobs on a regular basis or sending out personal LinkedIn, messages to people, right, on a regular basis, whatever your cadence is and your process is. But at the end of the day, you better make sure you research the company and the interviewers. I think somebody said in a previous session, it's not difficult to figure out, who's interviewing you. Obviously, they're emailing you, and to figure out who's on the slate of interviews, you can ask that question. Look them up on LinkedIn. They'll know that you're looking at their LinkedIn, but they'll know you're doing your due diligence, right? So make sure you do that so you get comfortable. Again, with me, I get a lot of energy when I'm in a room, right? I do my due diligence, I do my research, I'm prepared and prepped and ready to go. But the aspect of what I can't see, I take it all in the interview. You don't have that. We don't have that in the environment we live in right now. So get as much information as you possibly can, so that you're ready to go. But do your research, the company and the interviewers. Prepare a set of questions. I know this is common sense, but again, what's common sense often is not commonly done. Not just, random questions, specific questions, around the specific job. There's obviously a job description there. There's capabilities and abilities and requirements and things that they have there. You want to have those questions kind of set. It might not be your hip pocket ones you ask at the end, but be ready, right? Prepare a set of questions, right? Again, basic stuff, but there's some folks done interviewing, turn it over to you. Any questions you have for me? No, I think I'm good. Yeah, you are good. Make sure you have, prepare, a set of questions, right? Conduct a mock interview, right? Again, this is a new environment that we're living in. It's not the same interviewing in person. Interview with somebody, on FaceTime or on whatever platform, the company tells you to use. Do that, right? So you kind of see, your affect and your effect, on the screen. Do that so you get comfortable with it, because it's, specifically if it's an interview where it's a pre-recorded interview, you're not talking to anybody. You're just answering set questions. That's a little weird. It can be a little weird. So conduct some mock interviews so you get used to it, right? Print out the job description, your resume.
Hansford, I want to pause you for that point, because you just made it. You hit on it, but I don't know if people realize that you can actually do interviews without people, where a company will send you questions to answer and you just talk to a camera and then they get uploaded to the recruiter. I think a lot of people probably don't realize that's a thing.
That is a thing. I think somebody in the previous session talked about the volume of interviews people get, for certain jobs. It's a lot to kind of go through, to screen out candidates and to really hone in on the specifics what we're looking for. There's some jobs, where they do that. Where it's, here's a 5 set of questions, answer them. You can delete and you can do all these things, but that can be a little weird, so practice. Thanks for bringing that up, Nick. This point over here, print out the job description, your resume and notes. The reason why that's important, again, one of the beauties of, again, I love to do things in person, but one of the beauties of not being in person, doing things virtually, you can have your notes right here without them seeing that you have them right here, or you have them propped up over here, where there's a little bit, very minor eye movement, right? Because they're looking right at you. But you can have those notes, with you. You have the job description is right there with you as well. You have things highlighted. In the previous environment we lived in, I mean, it's a little odd if somebody came to an interview and had the job description, all these things highlighted. Nothing wrong with that. You're doing your job. But in the environment we live in right now, you should do that, and you should have that, right? Particularly if it's a screen interview or the first round interview, they're going to walk through your resume, have it in front of you, right? You should probably have it memorized already, but have those documents in front of you and have your notes, which have, all your set questions, different things, that you have, right? So that you can have this one-on-one conversation where it's not like this, you taking notes or you looking down at your notes and kind of coming back up. There's nothing wrong. Don't hear what I'm not saying. There's nothing wrong with you taking a pause and to think, to introspect, about a particular question, but if you have, some notes, make sure you practice not looking down at it, minimize all distractions, as I said before, right? What's happening behind you, what's going on around you, what you have on, all those particular things. Minimize all distractions, because all you have is that interviewer, and you and the screen. So everything right there is what they're looking at. They're looking at everything, all senses. They're looking at your facial, cues, facial gestures, your hand movement, all those things going on. All the party that's happening back here, they're looking at that. So you want to minimize all distractions as much as possible. And then this last thing here around foundational tips, get your energy level up. If you need to do some calisthenics right before, your interview, take a walk, do whatever. I think it's important because that stuff comes off in an interview, right? Because people, like Nick said, one of the greatest fears of people is public speaking. All right, that's what interviewing kind of is, but it's just with one person, right? If you want to get your energy level up, do some calisthenics. I know it sounds weird. Do some push-ups, exercise, whatever it may be, to get your energy level up, because I can, as an interviewer, as a hireman, I can feel that, when I'm interviewing you, right? Because leading up to the interview, you're probably nervous as all get out, and it zaps you of your energy, and you got all this stuff going on, and it just minimizes your energy in the interview, right? Because again, you're speaking oftentimes without saying anything. So fixate and focus on those types of things, right? Those are foundational tips, right? We'll keep moving along. So during the interview, I know this sounds weird, but don't get lost. What I mean by that, right? In the previous environment, we would drive and go and get our parking instructions, all that stuff. We're not doing that. But what I mean by don't get lost, understand all the tools they send you, where you need to be, what platform, what time, right? You're supposed to be there. That is so critical and important. Like, there's no excuse nowadays to be late, to an interview, right? You can't say it was parking. You can't say you got physically lost, because we're right here talking. So have all those things with you and don't get lost, right? You only have one time to make a first impression, right? And that first impression oftentimes takes the place of that, like that handshake. You can't, obviously, we're, sheltering in place and social distancing, you're not going to, handshake, but how you show up, when you show up, and the time is critical and important. So don't get lost, right? Because if you do get lost, you will get lost in the shuffle, in the sense of for this particular job. So don't get lost, right? Speak before you open your mouth. And what do I mean by that? I know that sounds interesting. What you have on, what you're wearing, right? We live in the COVID environment now. People look very professional up top, and they got shorts. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as I can't see it. But still pay attention to what it is that you're wearing. That's critical and important, because again, you speak a lot from what you don't say, oftentimes more than what you do say. Take away all the distractions, right? Because you're speaking before you actually open your mouth. So understand, it's still very important how you're dressed for the particular job in the role. That's important, right? And this one, slow it down. I naturally talk pretty fast. So I'm talking extremely slow right now, and it's bothering me to do this. But the reality is, slow it down so they can hear you. Because again, if you have certain technology and there's little glitches and this and that, and you're talking really fast, and you see the hiring manager, people leaning in, that means you're probably talking too fast or something's going on. So try to slow down. It's going to, especially again, if you talk really fast, it's going to feel slow, but to the person who's listening, it's not slow. right? Because they want to hear every single thing that you say. So slow it down, right?
And then Hansford, just to reinforce the point you made on the previous slide, the whole idea of doing a practice mock interview, for those of you that are in school or recently graduated, or even if you graduated from a college, the career centers of schools do mock interviews. And they even, so for current students, and a fun fact is often they will often be open to helping alumni as well. So do not hesitate to reach out to your career center for your local college or university where you possibly went.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We'll move along because I, again, want to make sure we have some questions here or answer your questions that you have. Hopefully I'm thorough and there's no questions, but I don't mind. You know, a little play on words here, but shoot for the star, right? STAR method. If you're not familiar with it, get familiar with it. Situation, the task, right? The action that you took, and the result, or I, you know, sometimes say reflection, like what did you learn? Pay attention to that. So when you're asked questions, you follow that specific motto. That's very, very important. Research that. STAR method. That's how you answer your questions, right? Stay focused, right? And I think if you have a method of how you answer questions and you've done your due diligence and you've researched, you've prepped and you've prepared, you will stay focused. This is an interview, right? You have an allotted amount of time. Be succinct with what you're saying. Stick and get to the point. You're selling yourself. You're not there to tell your life story. You're selling yourself as to why they should hire you. So stay focused on what it is that you're doing, right? Some people love to kind of make that connection, and some interviewers are great with that, right? They kind of, they like decrease your guards, and then some people just let it all out and go. No. Stay focused. This is an interview, right? You're trying to distinguish and differentiate yourself, right? And this one, ask questions as if you just accepted the job. Offer. This is important, right? Some people, I don't know, they don't ask, those specific questions, but ask as if you just accepted the job in the sense of, what does success look like? How will, I as an employee, my performance be measured, right? What does success look like in the first 90 days? Questions like that, ask those specific questions. It's great to ask questions about the organization, but it's also great to ask questions, about if you're in the particular role, what does that look like? So that's critical and that's important. Have some of those questions set, right? Last thing here, one more slide after this one will be done, right? Make sure, we'll talk about afterwards, right? Make sure you are clear on the next steps and the timeline. There's nothing wrong with you asking around what's the process, right? First round, second round, final round, whatever it may be, you should know that, right? And the timeline in which they're looking to fill this particular role. Because you can call yourself patient all you want. We're all, to some degree, impatient, but impatience comes because of a lack of, knowledge. So don't take it from yourself by not asking specific questions. Ask that questions and be very clear on the next steps and timeline. Because again, if you're looking for a job or you're trying to, make a shift to another job, another company, you're probably doing more than one interview and you have a lot going on. So at least from a timeline perspective, if an offer comes, but it's your second or third, company that, on your list, kind of where to kind of place that. But if you don't ask that question, you won't know. So make sure you do that, right? Self-debrief and follow. What do I mean by that? It can be a little disturbing, taking a lot of notes and having your head down, in an interview. But right after the meeting, when you press end and leave the meeting, take notes on what you heard, what you learned, whatever it may be, what the next steps are, whatever. You can do that so that you can reflect. And if need be, if you had a panel interview or with a interviewer, you can send them a note via LinkedIn or email just to reflect on, thanking them for the opportunity to interview and reflect on a few things, that you probably mentioned to sell yourself or things that they mentioned what they were looking for, right? That's critical and that's important. Connect with the interviewers online, right? There's no excuse not to do that now in the virtual world that we live in. LinkedIn, it's okay. Nobody's passing, well, some people are, passing cards, but LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn, right? Regardless of what the outcome will be, but connect with them on LinkedIn. And I would assume your LinkedIn is on point, right? It looks very much like your resume, which is great, so it reflects that. So make sure you do that, right? Contact references, go ahead.
Hey Hansford, if their LinkedIn is not on point, our next guest, Sarah, at 11:30. He's going to go through how to update your LinkedIn. So for those that are interested and need some help, that'll be next. So thanks for a good tip.
Love it. So contact your references. Give them a heads up. Some people have references. They call them 2-3 years ago, or just you put people on there because they'll say things about you. But contact your references and let them know. Particularly if you're hiring, or I should say, interviewing for more than one job. There could be a lot going on there, right? So make sure you contact them and let them know what's going on. Give them an update on what's going on, because that's like for lack of better words, your board of advisors as it relates to your career search or your career advancement. Keep them informed of what's going on, right? And then get comfortable with waiting. Yeah, that was weird, me kind of staring at you, but that's like, silence and just waiting is awkward for a lot of people. But the reality is, if you ask that question, and you're clear around the next steps in the timeline, you got to get comfortable with waiting, right? And the best way to do that is to make sure you fill your time with activity. Because again, if you don't have a job, you're looking for a new job, you're trying to advance. Your job, a portion of it, again, if you don't have a job, that is your full-time job. If you do have a job, that's a section of it. Your job and your time should be filled with something, right? So get comfortable with being patient and waiting. The last thing I'll talk about, and I call these kind of like bookend, things that you should, I think key, like nuggets. Before the interview, during the interview, after the interview. And the first one is around practice and prepare. I cannot stress that enough. There's absolutely no excuse for you to show up for an interview and don't know what the heck is going on, or can't speak to the company, or can't talk about your accomplishments and whatnot. The question I always ask, I won't say it, well, why are you here? Obviously, we looked at your resume and it's great, but we can tell if you didn't practice nor you prepared, right? Those are things that we're looking at, you as a potential hire to this particular company. You're demonstrating, some of your traits. You're a person who prepares and who practices, who gets ready, for meetings or projects, whatever it may be. So make sure you practice, and you prepare for your interview, right? I'll tell you, like it's always been told to me, if you fail to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So make sure you practice and prepare. You cannot do that too much, right? The second thing, you're always selling yourself. This interview is about you. So make sure you can talk about you. You might get that question some people ask, tell me about yourself. That is not an opportunity for you to tell your life story, right? I'm a very, I guess you'd say, could connect with people. I love to do that. But the reality is, it's an opportunity for you to sell yourself. Think about what's in it for them when they ask you that question around, tell me about yourself. What they're really saying is, what do you bring to the table? Like, why should we hire you? It's great to know you're from Connecticut and you're from Brazil, wherever it may be. But we know that. We have your resume. But why should we hire you? What's in it for us? Answer that question. And the last thing is around, after the interview, we talked about different things that you should do, but your mind should be on the next up. What's next? Next one up. Again, if you're in the process of looking for a job, trying to go from one company to the next or advance in your company, you should be thinking about the next step after that. So these are what I call bookend. Obviously there's 3 things here, not beginning and end, but things that you should be thinking about, some nuggets as it relates to during the job or before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview. So what's the bottom line with everything that I just said? Again, we are in a virtual environment. There's a lot of things that remain the same, and there's a lot of things that has changed. Let's not make it more complicated than what it really is. When you're interviewing, it's about you're not building a particular relationship, but you are for like those 30 minutes or so, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to leave an impression with who's ever interviewing you for them to say, you know what? And legally, they can't say this. I like him. Not gonna hire somebody because you like them. But the reality is, what they're thinking in their mind is, I like Nick Wagner. I love what he's bringing to the table. I loved our interaction, our communication. Although it was a technical interview, a behavioral-based interview, I felt like we really connected in the sense of I understand where he's coming from. All those things around his personality, his traits, it came out. Him being a leader and a inclusive leader and all that. I felt that coming out. You want them to walk away and say, you know what? I really like that person. And that's the bottom line. Let's not make it more complicated than what it is. And like I said before, we're in a COVID environment. We've been challenged, in more ways than one, whether it's personally, professionally, or psychologically. But again, like I said before, the one thing I know about human beings is that, we're resilient. So be resilient in whatever situation you're in. You're probably not looking for a job, trying to advance. Be resilient. And that's the bottom line. So I'll stop right there and thank you. Hopefully we left, I know I did, some time for us if you have any questions.
Yes, Hansford, thank you so much. I'm going to remove, I'll unshare your presentation. And
Okay.
then what we'll do is I have a bunch of questions lined up that I'm taking from the chat. If you'd be happy enough to answer them, that would be great. The first question is, since we are in the virtual environment, you gave a lot of great tips about like your setup. Like, do you actually recommend purchasing, a better microphone to ensure that you sound good when interviewing, right? So I know you have a specific device you're using now. I'm using these headsets. I'm using a microphone. Do you recommend doing that?
I do, because again, if all you're going to do is depend on your computer to have a conversation, it could fail you. So I recommend doing that. Anything that is of value to you, you invest in. That's just the reality. So your career and your livelihood and your ability to take care of your family or to take care of yourself, I think it's important. So investing in some kind of, I'm not saying a high-end mic, where you're kind of like a DJ or singing or something like that, but just something that is clear. Right. I won't demonstrate it now, but you can hear the difference between my puck and if I pull this out and you hear me in my computer, but I won't do that. And invest in some lighting too, because I'm like, man, this lighting is going. I'm trying to get the natural light in here, but anyway, you should invest in tools.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you. So one of the questions, many jobs you apply for on job sites include no contact information. There's no way to reach out to a person, recruiter, or hiring manager to follow up on the status of an application or reinforce interest in the job, either if like before you would get an interview. Any advice on this? This would be pre-interview, right? So how do you get into the interview? Sure.
So a couple things with that. Number one, if it's a company that you are looking at, if you're at the place where you're asking that question to yourself, I think you're behind. Because if it's a company that you want to work for, you should have already did some research on that company. Again, go on LinkedIn, social media. There's no excuse, and look up, put the name in there. There's companies that every company will come up, plus, those who kind of work there. Look through that. And is there somebody that it's a first or second or third connection? Reach out to them. Even if it's a third connection and you have to kind of send them an email, a note to have an exploratory conversation, do that. But again, you're right. When you interview or you apply for a job, you're not going to know who the recruiter is unless you actually know someone who's there. And I think it was said in a previous meeting, like, work your network. If there's somebody who works at that company, reach out to them. See what they can tell you, or if they can introduce you to someone. It might not be the recruiter, but at least someone maybe in that department who can talk to you about that department, the culture, the hiring manager, whatever it may be. So there's ways you can kind of do that. But again, if you're asking yourself that question and you just applied, you're late. And that's my advice.
I appreciate that, Hansford. This was about the thing we brought up. Yesterday I had an interview where it was automated with questions and my answers were recorded. I found it very hard to interview with not having another person to interact with. I completely agree with that. Any suggestions for succeeding in an interview without a person on the other end, which is probably new for a lot of people?
Yeah, practice and practice. It's almost like talking to yourself in the mirror. It's odd, it's weird. The good thing about it, with a lot of them, you can kind of delete it and record it again. Because if you couldn't, shoot, I'd be sweating for you, but the reality is you should practice as much as possible. Everybody knows it's a little awkward, but as long as you can get, out what it is you're trying to communicate, right? Because sometimes some people's face does something completely different, because they're nervous as all get out. But the reality is you need to practice as much as you possibly can. It goes back to what I said before, prepare and practice and in the pursuit of perfection. But that would be my advice to you, because you can't take the awkwardness away. It's like having dinner by yourself. I like it. Read my book and do whatever, or watching a movie by yourself. It's a little awkward, but the reality is it's just what it is and you can't change it. So get comfortable with it.
Yeah, that's good advice. This is about you have an interview, and then a couple things happen after you have the interview, and I want to walk you through a couple of these, Hansford. You complete a final round interview, you're rejected or don't hear back.
Yep.
Is it acceptable to ask for feedback on the interview from the person you interviewed with?
100%. 100%. I think it's you're doing yourself an injustice not to ask. Right now, the question is, will they answer you, and how they answer you? Just so you know, there's certain things they can and cannot say. Not that you would sue the mess out of me or my company, but there's some things that if I say, you can use it as discrimination, against you. There's certain rights that are protected, or I guess you would say identifiers that are protected. So there's things that they can and cannot say. But yes, they can give you some feedback. Will it be in depth? I don't know. Will it be honest? It'll be honest, but it might be vague. It might not be exactly everything you want to hear. But again, I think you would do yourself an injustice not to ask. It's important because, again, look at it as a building block to whatever you're doing next. That's the way you should look at it. Because again, if you think about those bookend things I talked about, when you're done with the interview, what's next? On to the next one. Like, what's next? But don't leave kind of where you are right now. But if you want to build upon what's next, you need to kind of figure out, what you did wrong to kind of make it right.
Now, if you ask for feedback and they don't reply, Hansford, any recommendations on that situation?
Yeah, don't hassle them. Don't feel bad. Yeah, the reality is.
So one email, one contact. If they don't reply, leave it alone.
I do things in more than one. I think one is, that's my thing. They'll have it, give them some grace. They might miss it. Hit them up a second time. Give some space in between. Right. And if they don't, this is me, I love to do things in threes. If they don't answer that, so you think about 2 weeks, 2 more weeks, thank them. Thank you so much for the opportunity, because again, they didn't answer your email and they might just respond back like, oh, dang, Nick Wagner is like, I was calling him tomorrow. I've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. Nick, I'm so sorry. Whatever. But that's what I do. So 3 times, but I didn't times in 3 days though. Right.
No, that's a good point. And the last question, and then we're gonna hand it over to Sarah Burgess, who's our next speaker. And actually, Sarah, I'm gonna add you in while Hansford asks this last question. So we'll bring you into the stream. Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very festive. I love your background. So
Thank you.
we got one more question, Hansford, and I know this is something you're really passionate about. It's a question about diversity. So, are companies paying more attention to diversity now in the wake of everything that has happened here in the United States? Right? I know Sarah's in the UK, but we're in the US. Any thoughts on diversity and to close out your session today on interviewing?
Yes, the answer is yes. I'll say it this way. Diversity, the value that individuals bring and add to an organization has always been something that's really valued. We know that, right? Because again, it drives innovation. It increases the level of performance on teams. And at the end of the day, it adds to the bottom line. But you're right. Given the wake of what's happening around, social injustice and racial injustice, it's struck the conscience of most companies, right? Because what it's done, it's told them, number one, you're being reactive. Why? Because you didn't deal with it. Like you guys are not comfortable having this particular conversation. It's making you look at your policies and make you look at diversity at the higher level, middle level, and at the entry level, and how you're not just hiring them, you're developing them and you're retaining them. So I would say, yes, I can't speak for every company. I can speak for mine and others that I've seen. This is critical and this is important, right? Again, we do know that for those 3 things I mentioned to you, why it's important, but also too, we understand in order for us as a company, companies in general, to be able to respond to what's happening in society, we got to make sure inside we're prepped and we're ready. So having these conversations, these uncomfortable conversations and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, it's happening every single company. There's no excuse. Leaders are told and have a responsibility to lead, not just in the business, be able to lead these types of conversations. There's a lot going on. People are getting trained, developed, and thinking about their own, surroundings. So the answer is yes. It's very, very important to be culturally competent. Right. It's very important, inclusive leadership, right? Because the work environment is going to change. I know I'm over time. I could talk about this forever, but it's very critical. It's very important. Yes.
So Hansford, thank you. Great tips. I appreciate you making time. I did include your LinkedIn profile in the chat for anyone that wants to connect with Hansford. do not hesitate to reach out to him. He's a fantastic person to connect with. And again, you can tell he's super passionate about helping people. So Hansford, thank you.